Today, we're heading straight into a high-stakes constitutional battle unfolding right here in Idaho for the 2026 legislative session. It's about short-term vacation rentals and two competing bills that could reshape property rights across the state: Senate Bill 1263 and House Bill 583. At its heart, this fight boils down to a fundamental question: can the government reclassify your private home as a commercial business simply because you're earning a certain amount of money from renting it out? We're unpacking whether a house remains a residence or magically becomes a business in the eyes of the law. The analysis we're drawing from leans heavily on what it calls the home is a home doctrine. The core idea is straightforward. A house doesn't transform into a hotel just because money changes hands. This doctrine is built on a triad of Idaho court precedents that create a strong shield around property rights. First, there's the landmark 2003 case, Pine Haven Planning Board versus Brooks. That ruling established the activity-defined use test. The court looked at what actually happens inside a vacation rental: people sleeping, eating, watching TV, sheltering, everyday residential activities. The conclusion? A financial transaction doesn't flip the property's use from residential to commercial. If the activity is residential, the zoning and treatment stay residential. Then we have more recent reinforcement. In 2025, Idaho Association of Realtors versus City of Lava Hot Springs introduced the express or practical effect test, which prevents cities from discriminating based on who owns the property. You can't have one set of rules for a resident owner and harsher ones for a non-resident owner if the house is being used the exact same way. And there's North Henry's Lake versus Norton from 2026, emphasizing that property rights run with the land and can't be stripped away retroactively. With that legal foundation in place, let's take a look at the two bills. Senate Bill 1263 comes across as the sword in this fight. The analysis gives it a failing grade, a D- at best, because it largely ignores these precedents. Property rights become a privilege the government sells via compliance costs, licenses, or forced upgrades, and can revoke if you cross arbitrary lines like revenue caps. The bill would require licenses for owners with a financial interest in 4 or more units, or, critically, any single property generating over $10,000 in annual gross revenue from short-term rentals. That $10,000 threshold is incredibly low. Rent a cabin for a couple of weeks in summer at typical rates, and you're over the line. A cheaper spot might take longer to hit it, but the cutoff is completely arbitrary. Is a home earning $10,001 suddenly a greater safety risk than one at $9,999? Of course not. A fire doesn't check your tax return. But the true danger of SB 1263 is what analysts call the retrofit trap. Once a home is reclassified as commercial, cities can demand commercial-grade upgrades, such as mandatory fire suppression systems. These can cost $20,000 to $50,000 or more, destroying the owner's investment-backed expectations and constituting a regulatory taking. It raises serious equal protection concerns and could spark a litigation tsunami. Now, contrast that with House Bill 583, the Shield. This one earns an A rating in the analysis. It's the polar opposite. It explicitly prohibits cities from imposing special licenses, permits, or major structural modifications on short-term rentals. It classifies all vacation rentals as non-transient residential uses, which legally blocks the application of commercial building codes and keeps them under residential standards. In essence, it writes the Pine Haven logic directly into state law, protecting vested rights and preventing cities from retroactively changing the rules. This highlights the deeper tension: municipal police power to regulate a legally protected use on one side versus inalienable property rights on the other. If the state starts defining commercial purely by a dollar amount rather than actual activity, it opens a troubling door. Think about it. If earning $10,000 from your home turns it into a heavily regulated business, what happens when you sell a used car online for $12,000 or a collection of antiques. At what point does government regulation turn a fundamental right into a mere revocable privilege? So to wrap up, the report's conclusion is that SB 1263 creates a backdrop for continued expensive, messy legal fights across Idaho, while HB 583 protects property rights by aligning with the court precedents that are already there. It's a choice between heavy-handed regulation and respecting the home as a home. That's the takeaway. It really highlights this tension between regulation and private ownership. And it leaves you with a pretty heavy question to think about. Requiring a permit to exercise a fundamental right is like charging a fee for breathing air. Will Idaho continue to allow local government to transform an inherent, constitutionally protected entitlement into something conditional, discretionary, and subject to arbitrary withdrawal, essentially making ownership or use dependent on bureaucratic approval rather than natural or constitutional guarantee? It's time for Idaho to settle this debate.